Well, thank you. This talk is entitled Principles of Motivation. And for many years, I did a talk called Teaching Boys and Other Children Who Would Rather Be Making Forts All Day. This was a two-part talk. The first half was about the neurophysiological differences between boys and girls, men and women, males and females, how we see differently, hear differently, handle stress and pain very differently from a physiological and neurological point of view, and the implications for that in teaching all of our children. And then the second half was on the principles of motivation, the 4 forms of relevancy, the 3 laws of motivation, and the 2 secret weapons. What happened was the talk kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, so I split it into 2. So now we have teaching boys and girls for a better understanding, and this is the first time we've recorded this talk in its standalone format. So I have that problem. I keep thinking of one more interesting thing to say, and then pretty soon the talk is an hour and a half long and I can't do it. So, motivation. I have been a student of motivation my entire adult life. As some of you may know, my formal training is neither in English nor in elementary education. I kind of stumbled into this business of teaching writing, but my primary training is as a violin teacher. And I lived in Japan 3 years. I studied with Dr. Shinichi Suzuki, the founder of Suzuki Method. I have extensive kinder music and early childhood training. And I spent, the first 15 years of my adult life as a full-time early childhood music teacher. And I will tell you that one of the jobs of a music teacher is to understand motivation in order to help parents, help children practice every day. Because if they practice every day, they do better, everyone's happier, and they continue to pay you for your lessons. If they don't practice every day, they don't make as good progress, and you have the danger of losing your students, which is very bad economically. Then you've got to go recruit more students. So I ended up doing a lot of work and study and contemplation of motivation as a part of my job. And then when I came into the world of teaching writing, I saw a whole lot of similarities between teaching music and teaching English composition. Both are arts. You have to do them to learn them. There's a pathway. Everybody benefits from walking on that same pathway, regardless of age. Imitation is critical to success, and of course, motivation. But these are principles, I believe, that will apply for any type of motivation in any type of situation. So we will talk about the 4 forms of relevancy, the 3 laws of motivation, and we will finish up with the 2 secret weapons. Now, relevancy. I have noticed that there's kind of this intangible factor. When something is present, when this factor is present, learning and teaching is easier. When it is absent, learning and teaching is harder. When something is meaningful, interesting, applicable, useful, relevant in some way, it's easier to learn. Wouldn't you agree? And when something is not meaningful, applicable, useful, relevant in some way, it is harder to learn. Wouldn't you agree? And that's true for all of us, whether we're little kids or old people like me. So I have kind of identified 4 forms of relevancy. So we will start with the highest and most effective form of relevancy, and that would be intrinsic. Intrinsic relevancy is when something is relevant to you, interesting to you, meaningful to you, and you don't necessarily even know why. It's just a part of who you are. It's kind of part personality, part environment, and it generally can start showing at a young age. And what we look at is how do we capitalize on this kind of intrinsic relevancy. I'll give you a few examples. How many of you know a boy who is, say, 9, 10, 11 years old, in that zone, plus or minus a little bit, who is not interested in knives or swords or weaponry of some sort? Yeah, I would say that it's usually about 1 or 2 people out of 1,000 that I ask who will say, yeah, I have a 10-year-old boy, he couldn't care less about it. But I think we're in the high 99% of boys who are intrinsically interested in that. Why? We don't necessarily set out and say, I have to help this boy become interested in knives. It just happens. No, that doesn't mean that all boys are, and that doesn't mean there aren't girls who are interested in knives. But I think we can say, okay, that's kind of a clear and obvious case. Sometimes it's more individual. I will tell you, for example, that my mother said that I was begging for a violin from the time I could talk. I don't know why. She was a piano teacher and a voice teacher. So I grew up in a musical home, and I went to orchestra kinds of things. So there was exposure, but why I was so driven to the violin, I don't know. What I can say in retrospect is if I hadn't grown up playing the violin, I wouldn't be here today, you wouldn't be here today, IEW would not exist. Nothing in my life right now would be the way it is if I hadn't grown up playing the violin. I don't actually touch violins very often anymore because I'm so dreadfully out of practice. But I will say that my parents' willingness to respond to that idea of me playing the violin and allow that to happen, I would say is the most formative and significant factor on who I became as an adult. Far more influential than any other single thing I can pinpoint from my childhood. So what we want to do then is we want to capitalize on intrinsic relevancies. In writing, of course, we think, well, we would like to find things that are intrinsically interesting to children, and they mostly like things like animals that are weird or ugly or dangerous, or people who did really interesting things, or strange things. That kind of grabs their attention right off. And in creating materials for writing courses, I and my team have worked to find those things that have the highest likelihood of having kind of that intrinsic attractiveness to the largest number of children, whether it's, strange foods that people eat in different places in the world, or, prisoners who supposedly escaped from Alcatraz, right? And everything in between, of course, depending on the age and reading level and all that. So the more I've been at this teaching business, the more I am starting to see how clearly that how a person learns something is actually more important than what they learn. Because you learn stuff and then you forget it. Think of all the things you forgot after being in school. Think of the things that you remember. They were either extremely interesting to you at the time, or they had reinforcement. But when children are very interested, then they are able to engage their memory and imagination and their willpower to learn stuff that they are less likely to do, less able to do when things are less interesting. Does that all make sense? Now, in an ideal world, everything would be interesting to everyone, but that's not the case. And so we move to the second form of relevancy, which would be inspired relevancy. Some things are interesting to some people, but not necessarily someone else. But you've probably noticed that when children are with other children who are interested in something, there's kind of a vicarious contagion there that happens, and they can get kind of interested in that. I'll give you a couple examples, one theoretical, one actual, one kind of hypothetical. Let's say you say to, Billy, "Hey, Billy, would you like to collect stamps?" Billy says, "Well, no, Not really. Okay, well, you don't have to. It was just an idea. All right, Billy goes over to his cousin's house. He comes home. Hey, Mom, can I collect stamps? Well, yeah, I thought you didn't want to collect stamps. Well, yeah, but my cousin Johnny, he's got this really awesome stamp collection. He's got stamps from 61 different countries. He's got one stamp that's worth $5. He's got these like cool envelope things. Well, what happened there? Well, he didn't have information or experience to know whether he would like something or not. But because he was exposed to someone whom he loves or respects to some degree, that child's interest inspired him to be interesting. Now, I don't know personally anyone who collects stamps anymore, but sometimes we see that happening in various ways. A child who's not particularly interested in something, but then they're in an environment with other people who are, and they get interested as a result of that. I'll give you a real life example here. I came home one day and walked into my kitchen, and there was a little group of 4, I believe, teenage girls. They were all, 14 to 17 maybe. And they were eating my chips and my guacamole, having a heated discussion about whether admitting Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia to the NATO alliance would alienate Russia and degrade Russian-American relations. This was 20 years ago. Okay, now that's unusual for a group of 4 teenage girls in their spare time, in an informal social environment, talking about foreign policy like this. So where did that come from? Well, it happened that all 4 of these teenage girls were in the debate club that we had, homeschool speech and debate club when we were in California. And the resolution for that year was that NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, should be significantly reformed or abolished. So all of the kids in the debate world were coming up with plans to reform or change or abolish NATO. And one of those plans was admitting the Baltics, and one of the arguments for or against it was the effect that that would have on Russia. And I was kind of amazed at this because, normally, if you had 4 teenage girls in your kitchen eating your chips and guacamole, what would they be talking about? Music. Yeah, either boys, music, or clothes, but probably not that. And so that was very interesting to me. And of course, I've done many years of speech and debate coaching and having my kids involved. And what I've noticed is that there is an amazing positive peer pressure that occurs when there is a competition. Competition for many children creates relevancy. It inspires relevancy. Most people couldn't really care anymore about NATO. Well, of course, these days it's all in the news, but it's not one of those things that a whole lot of people know anything about, let alone care. And yet, because they wanted to win debate rounds, they were in their spare time exploring all the intricacies of this whole set of information. And I've also noticed that when children are inspired or intrinsically driven to go deep into something, right? Any one thing. And there's been some super obscure stuff. The first year we did speech and debate, it was that the medical malpractice law in the United States should be significantly reformed. And I learned more about medical malpractice law than I knew about most other things, at least for a while. And it was all very technical, obscure stuff, right? And you're probably going to forget that down the line. But what happens is that when you go deep into something, you learn the subjects, right? So you learn the history of it, you learn the politics of it, you learn the math and economics of it, you learn the grammar and vocabulary of the thing. So when you can find a situation where students have the freedom to go deep into something that they are inspired to learn about, they actually learn those kind of subjects that we might try to teach in isolation much, much better. And then the end of childhood is, what do you take out of it? It's really not what you learn, but did you learn how to learn? And that is what I see with intrinsic and inspired relevancies, is that when they pursue something because they are interiorly motivated or motivated by positive peer pressure, they engage their will, and the result is they learn how to learn much better. But there are some things which are not actually interesting to anybody. But you have to learn them, right? We might include in this things like math facts, right? Multiplication facts. English spelling and grammar might fall into that category. Maybe it's stuff that seems really irrelevant to almost everybody, certain aspects of geology or geography, right? So sometimes you don't have any recourse to intrinsic relevancy. You don't find anyone who's inspired to learn it, and so you have to kind of go to the next layer of relevancy, which I would call contrived. Contrived relevancy essentially is when you create a game. Right? I'm not particularly interested in this, but I do like to win. And because I am a boy who likes to win, I might pay attention to this stuff you want me to pay attention to, not because I care, but because I like to win. And sometimes it's a very, very small shift from a chore to a challenge. I will give you an example. There have been, for many years in existence, language arts curriculum that would include things like this. Here is a paragraph. Underline all the prepositional phrases in this paragraph with a single underline, and underline the preposition itself with a double underline. Blech. I mean, it is a totally awful, meaningless, stupid activity to 99.99999% of all English-speaking people on Earth, but you have to do it. Well, when there's something meaningless that you have to do, the tendency is to figure out how to not have to do it, right? I mean, that's just human nature. So then you get arguing, you get procrastinating, you get all that stuff. Okay, here's the shift, very small shift. Here's a paragraph. Hidden inside this paragraph are 16 prepositional phrases. Find them all, and you win. This is a completely different activity, right? I couldn't care less about prepositional phrases, but I like to win, and if you show me how to do it, I'll play your game, and who knows, maybe I'll learn something about that in the process. So creating games is a very, I would say, key tool in the toolbox of teachers and parents and anyone who's trying to motivate kids to do anything. And if you ever watch one of these teacher hero movies, there's always a scene in the teacher hero movie where the teacher hero has created some sort of game to motivate the students to do whatever it is that they probably wouldn't want to do if there wasn't a game, right? So you can use this. Now, there are a couple rules of games that you must follow if you want your games to work. The first rule of a game is it must be possible to win. If it is not possible to win, well, people figure that pretty fast, and if they don't believe they can win, they won't play your game. The whole gambling industry is based on this principle that it is possible to win, right? You go to a casino, you bet for a while, there is a chance that you can win, and if you leave while you're ahead, you can come out ahead and have, I suppose, the semblance of a good experience. If it were never possible to win, only really, really stupid people would go to casinos, right? So it's that possibility that is essential. Give you an example from real life. I watched my wife kind of blow it one day. She had our two youngest children, very extremely dyslexic 9-year-old son and 6-year-old little sister. She had created a little deck of flashcards on 3x5 cards, which was the Dolch reading list. There's 100 words on this list. And these are the words in English that are pretty much not sound-outable, right? You have to look at it and know what it is. Your phonics information falls short in helping you read a word like would, W-O-U-L-D. Where did that come from? Would you like to come? I mean, it must be some weird, barbaric sounding language that gradually made it, and the spelling was, that's the way it was, and it doesn't make sense. Would means would. Well, you just have to learn that, right? Okay, so she had this little list, this little pack of flashcards, and she created a game with the two kids, and you get 3 seconds to read the word. If you read it, you get the card, and if you don't, the other person gets a chance. Okay, well, she had been at this about 2 minutes, and the score was probably something like 4-0. Who was ahead? 6-year-old little sister. What does the boy do? Stand up and walk away. What's the mom to do? Son, you get back here right now and lose this game. Right? I mean, no, he had decided that it was not possible to win the game. Therefore, there was absolutely no reason to stick around and watch himself lose, right? You can't blame him. So I had to coach her. I said, well, first of all, you need to give them as much time as they need, because you put the 3-second rule on, that's just guaranteeing frustration and failure. So you give enough time. Second, cheat if you have to, right? Mouth the word. Yeah, you got it, would, okay. Here's your card, all right, you get the next one. And then you got 100 words. Say, all you have to do to win is get 40 words. You don't have to have someone lose. You could both win, right? And so, I had to coach her so that she could construct a game that had some effect in being useful. So that's the first rule you have to follow, and that is that it must be possible to win. The second rule is that a game generally needs to have it needs to have a potential gain as well as a potential loss. Most games do at some point become economic systems, right? Because, I'll play and win for the joy of winning a few times, but after that, if you want me to keep playing, what's in it for me, right? So if you only have a positive potential gain and say, do this hard thing, win the game, and you get something, the child is going to weigh it in his or her mind and say, well, is it worth it? Is doing the thing I am not interested in, don't care about doing, worth the benefit I'm going to get by doing it? And the problem is the child may say, no, it's not worth it. I don't want to play your game. At which point you would be tempted to create, to up the stakes a little bit and say, well, okay, it's a hard thing, I understand. So if you do it and you learn it, you get this better benefit. Okay, you have now created a game you never want to play, which is called How High Can We Bid Up Mom Before She Gets Angry and Makes Us Do It Anyway. Right? So if you only have a potential gain, the child may just blow it off and say, I don't care, right? Now, if you only have a potential loss, right, and say, learn this or suffer, right, then you create the opposite problem where the child will say, well, I'm going to suffer if I do, and I'm going to suffer if I don't. I'm just going to suffer no matter what happens. I might as well just go eat worms and die. And so you get this kind of overall hate of learning experience at that moment. Now, I'm not talking about discipline and obedience. I'm not talking necessarily about things like chores, right? Because there are things we have to do, and we have to do them whether we want to or not, whether we get anything out of it or not. That's life. I am talking about engaging the will and the intellect to learn better, right? So you have a potential gain and a potential loss. I'll give you a couple real life examples. When I first started teaching violin, I had the great privilege of meeting one of the best teachers in the country and spending some time with him. And I don't know if he created it, but I learned it from him. And it was called the 100 Days Perfect Practice and Listening Challenge. Okay? So this essentially was where you get a piece of paper with 100 boxes, and every day that the student practices their violin at least a little bit and listens to their recording at least a little bit, they can check off the box or color it in or put a sticker or whatever. Okay? The goal is to do 100 days without missing a single day. That's the game. Now, I would usually set this up with the parent and kind of negotiate on behalf of the student some kind of prize that the student could earn by doing this 100 Days Perfect Practice Challenge. I like things that are good for the child that you would like to do anyway, that are relationship building, have a special elegant dinner with mom or go to the minor league baseball game with dad, or, sometimes we would descend as low as a new video game, but, something that the child would perceive as worth working for, right? So there's your potential gain. Now, the potential loss. If you miss a day, you have to start all over again, right? So that's kind of a danger, right? Okay, so most of the time, this is how it would start. It would go. A child who hadn't done anything similar to this would be, okay, I want to get that good prize, I'll do it. And they do, 10, 12 days, and then they miss a day. Oh, there's one more rule. This was harder for the mom than for the child. The rule is you have to do 100 days in a row, and mom can't remind you. You have to remember on your own. And of course, the moms are like, but he'll forget and I'll have to start all over again. And then I'm saying, yes, that's the point, right? So anyway, child would usually get up 10, 12, 14, 6, somewhere in that 1 to 2 week zone and forget a day. Then they have to get a new chart and start all over again. And their reaction is kind of, ugh! But their renewed determination now is multifold. It's many times their original determination. And it's just fascinating. So they start again, and they get past that, and they get, maybe up into 60, 70, 80 days, whatever, and then probably have a close call. I remember one time a little girl said that she was out with her parents. They had to drive a long ways to get home, and it was at night, and she was asleep in the car, and her dad picked her up and carried her from the car and put her in the bed, and she woke up, it was like 11:40. And she's like, I didn't practice my violin today. So she got out of bed at 11:40 p.m., played Go Talent Roadie 4 times, quickly listened to her tape for 5 minutes, and then got to sleep and made it. Okay, so then 100 days, you get the prize. I would give the student a certificate. You accomplished the 100-day perfect practice listening challenge. I'd put their little star chart or whatever on the wall with other kids' charts. And then it became kind of a competition to see who could have the most decorated, colorful chart, although some people didn't care. But, and then I would say, well, why not go for 200? Let's do double or nothing here, right? No, you get the prize, but let's get another prize and see if you can go for 200 days. You go for 300 days, there's only one exception. That's if you're in the hospital or on a camping trip. And in that case, you have to sing your pieces rather than play them. But, 300 days of doing, at that point, you don't even need prizes because the kid's just rolling on pride, right? I will never lose my streak. I had one student who was over 1,200 days. And then she moved to a different city and I never saw her again. But can you think about that? What an incredible thing to have grown up to say, yeah, I can make myself do something hard every single day without missing a day. So that motivational system there, very, very effective. Give you another, this is kind of a hypothetical. I have suggested this to people and I have heard people do this. And, like any game or system or economic system you set up, it's not going to last forever. It's going to have an initial enthusiasm, and then there's going to be a dying out, and then you have to create some new game or system or something to motivate. But let's say you have a child who wrote something on a piece of paper, and there are a lot of spelling errors, right? Now, there's a few ways to deal with this. One is you could say, you have spelling errors, go fix them. Okay, that's probably the worst way to do it because the kid is kind of thinking, if I could have spelled it, I would have spelled it. So how am I supposed to fix it, right? And get that kind of thought. Another way to approach it would be to just edit the thing and put in all the correct spelling, say, here, go copy this over, and you're done. That has value too, but possibly the best thing to do would be to look at it and say, well, there's some words this child's trying to write. It'd be really hard for them to figure out how to spell it. I mean, actually, most words, if you don't already know how to spell them, you can't find them very easily in a dictionary. Think about the word tyrannical. How would you ever find that in a dictionary if you didn't already know pretty much at least the first several letters, right? Anyway, so you might fix the ones that the child wouldn't be able to fix easily, but then there's some they could, right? Say, okay, I fixed a few words here, but I see 10 words that I think you could spell correctly if you worked a little bit and tried. So here's the deal. Find and fix all 10, you get $1. Find and fix only 9, you win 50 cents. Find and fix 8, you win a quarter. Find and fix only 7, you win a dime. And find and fix only 6, you win a nickel. Find and fix only 5, it's a break-even deal. Find and fix only 4, you owe me a dime. Find and fix only 3, you owe me a quarter. Find and fix only 2, you owe me 50 cents. And if you find and fix only 1 or none, then you owe me $1 because I would then have to do your work for you, and I'm not going to do that without getting paid. Okay, you have completely transformed this activity for a child into a game called Get Mom's Buck, right? And that child may spend hours, right, with a dictionary or a computer trying to check in fact, one mom told me that he typed the whole thing in to the computer so he could find the misspelled words, so he could click and use them and then fix them on the paper, right? He spent hours, right? So why? Because it's now a game. But there's the potential gain and there's the potential loss. I'll give you another very effective real-life example. My son, who is the 6th of my 7 children, and who is also the only boy of the 7 children, was probably the most dyslexic child I have ever met. I mean, very, very, very unable to read anything at all until he was 11. I don't think he read a sentence until he was 11. He didn't read a book till he was 12. At 10, he was still struggling to sound out 3- and 4-letter words that were sound-outable. But I thought, well, he can't read, but I'm the writing guy, so he has to write. What's he going to write? I thought, well, the only thing really would be copying, right? So I set him up to do copying, just straight copy work every day. And I said, here's the deal. You can copy anything you want, any book you want to copy. And if you copy 100 words, right, a day, I will pay you a penny a word. And if you finish in 20 minutes, you get a 25-cent bonus. However, if you don't copy it correctly, right, and I'll forgive reversed letters, but I won't forgive the placement of letters, or if you miss a capital, right, you don't get paid. Furthermore, if you whine, complain, or argue, you get fined 10 cents for every word that you complain with. And you could go negative, and I own your bank account. Okay, so we started this, and he chose the Usborne Book of Knights and Medieval Weaponry, and I think that's so he could write a few words, be totally exhausted, and then look at a cool battle axe or something and kind of restore his soul, and then write a few more words and see a nifty dagger and, you know, kind of just keep his spirits up. But what was very interesting, and I said, you don't get this money cash in your pocket. This money is going to go into a special fund called the Airsoft Weaponry Purchase Fund. And that's the only way you can buy airsoft weaponry is with the money you earn. You can't use your birthday check from grandma. You have this much leverage over a 10-year-old. You don't have quite this much leverage over a 13-year-old. So there is a sensitive period, but you do over a 10-year-old. Well, okay, he started this, and for him, this was like the worst possible thing you could ask him to do, right? It was the most painful. It required the most self-control. It was just really, he would have literally been happier to shovel manure than copy words. But he did it. And what was very interesting is he never complained, even one time, because he did not like the idea of losing money. He's a very economically minded individual. And then he started very quickly to calculate, okay, if I'm perfect, I get $1.25 every day. How many days will it be until I can buy the new airsoft gun that I want to have when I go play airsoft with my friends? And he lived for airsoft. That was the reason to be alive at that age, was to play airsoft. And so he would calculate. He even came to me and said, could I do more than 100 words a day? I very wisely said, no. He said, well, could I do it on the weekends? I very wisely said, Saturday, not Sunday. He asked, why not Sunday? I said, cost me too much, right? But there was this zone, and he kept at this for, I don't know, probably 16 months or so. And it was tremendous because straight copy work, you know, even with slightly older kids, it builds stamina, it builds attentiveness to detail. They may possibly be reading what they're copying, which means they're going to recognize those later. And then just like anything, any kind of exercise, it does get easier the more you do it. So you hate it less and less because it's getting easier, right? So, but it had to have that potential gain and that potential loss. Otherwise, the whole system probably wouldn't have worked. Do you see? So when you contrive relevancy, and especially if you attach an economic system to that, you want to be sure that your game follows those two rules. If it needs to, has to be possible to succeed, and it has to have both potential gain and potential loss. If you have potential loss and no gain, then the whole thing shifts into what would probably be called the least effective form of relevancy, and that would be enforced. So we have intrinsic, inspired, contrived, enforced. Enforced relevancy is essentially when you say, you learn this or you will suffer a negative consequence. And most of the time when this is the context, you end up with the appearance of learning, but it disappears very quickly. I think the problem is a lot of us, that was kind of the default approach. Like, you know, when I was young, the whole reason to do well in school was to get A's. And if you didn't get good grades, there was a penalty for that, right? And then as we got older, it became a little more subtle. For example, you must take biology in high school, because if you don't, you can't graduate, get a diploma, and go to college. Furthermore, you must study for this test in biology, because if you don't get a good grade on the test, you won't get a good grade in the class. If you don't get a good grade in the class, it'll bring down your GPA. If your GPA is too low, not only will you not get into a good school, you might not get into college at all, which means you would then be suffering an entire lifetime of poverty and misery and suffering, and the best you're ever going to do is assistant manager at Denny's. And to avoid that horror, you study biology. Okay, so we all did this. I pick on biology because it was my least favorite class of my entire academic career. I disliked everything about it, and I'm really almost sure that 2 months after the end of ninth grade year, the amount of biology I remembered was below 1% of everything in that textbook and everything that happened in the class. Why? There was no relevancy whatsoever except the fear of not getting a grade, right? So it was just like, phew. So I would say, I am a person who would fall into that and say, you will do this or you will never eat again, right? Of course, they know I'm bluffing, but this idea of forcing people to do stuff by threats, there's a place where we fall into that, but I think we want to remember that whatever we're doing that way probably isn't working so well. So we see some systems work very, very well. I learned multiplication tables, not at school. I don't remember anything about it. I remember my parents had flashcards. I would sit in the bathtub and they would practice multiplication tables. And I would beg them. I would beg my father to do multiplication tables. Why? Because he told me, when you know all of these multiplication tables perfectly, up to 12 times 12, and can answer them with no hesitation, you get this Cub Scout knife that had all those cool little extra tools, like the precursor of the Swiss Army knife. I wanted that more than anything I wanted in the whole world when I was 8 years old. I would have done anything for that knife. I couldn't care less that 6 times 7 is 42, but I wanted to know that so that I could say it without hesitation and get that knife. So there are, maybe you can think back in your memory of things when you've been either intrinsically motivated, inspired by other people, or there was some kind of motivational system or prize or game that contrived relevancy for you. And also think about those things when you were kind of just forced to do something and it probably disappeared unless it was reinforced with a better system at some time in the future. So those are the 4 forms of relevancy. Next, we have the 3 laws of motivation. This is really 1 law and 2 corollaries, so they're all kind of connected. But the first law of motivation is this. Children like to do what they can do. Actually, this is true for all of us, isn't it? Don't you like doing the things that you're pretty good at? If you're a decent cook, you probably like cooking, right? If you're good at a sport, you probably like that sport. If you play the piano decently well, you probably like doing it. Why? Because you can, right? Children are the same way. They like doing what they can do. In fact, usually the first thing little kids start saying to you when they can talk is, look at me, watch me, see what I can do. I am really enjoying my grandparent years. It is so insanely, infinitely better than I ever imagined it would be. So all you young people, this is the reason you should have as many children as possible, so you have as many grandchildren as possible, so you have the best chance of having the most time that you can when you're older with your grandchildren. But it's very interesting because I get to observe them in a way I never really could observe my own children. Anyway, I have this one little granddaughter, and she would come over to our house, and she would leap from the couch and she's probably, I don't know, 3 maybe, 2.5, 3, 3.5. She would leap from the couch to the coffee table, and then from the coffee table to the couch. And she would just do this again and again. And she wanted to be sure that I was watching her all the time. Watch, Grandpa. And then she would leap. And then I would get distracted. She'd go, Grandpa, watch me. Okay. Why did she want to do this? Because she could. Right? Now, she's older. She doesn't do that anymore. Right? So she's not motivated in the same way because it's not something that she's developing that skill and becoming aware of her new thing. I really like this part of my job. I like talking to people. Why? Because I think I'm good at it, right? I don't know, but I assume from some of the feedback that I'm relatively good at talking to people, so I like to travel around and talk to people. That's the best part of my job. There are some parts of my job I do not like because I am not as good at those things, right? I think you can all relate. So the first law of motivation is children like to do what they can do. The second law is that children want to do what they think they can do. Right? In fact, that's what causes them to try to do something that they don't know if they can do because they think they can. My son, for example, when he was about 10 years old, wanted to jump off the roof. Why? He thought he could. I, contrastingly, had absolutely no desire at 50 years old to jump off the roof. I did not think that I could do so and not have a negative consequence. And the negative consequence far outweighs any satisfaction I could have got from jumping off the roof. But he wanted to, and so he did. And then he did it again. And then he did it again. And he continued to practice his jumping off the roof. And it moved from want to into like to. We just tried to keep that a secret from his mother, who did not believe that it was a good idea for 10-year-old boys to be jumping off the roof. Then he, of course, became a teenager who got into parkour. And if you don't know what that is, and you would like a real spine-tingling experience, go watch parkour fail videos on YouTube, and you moms will have that spine-tingling experience. And so, then he was leaping off huge buildings and throwing himself across chasms. And why? He thought he could, right? But see, that's really what kids are wired to do, right? Now, this leads us to the third law of motivation, which is this. Children hate and will refuse to do that which they believe they cannot do, right? Children hate and will refuse to do that which they believe they cannot do. This is actually true for me as well. I will give you an example. There is nothing short of a very good-sized 5-digit number, tax-free, that would cause me to ever willingly get on a snowboard. Why? Because I am absolutely convinced that if I get on a snowboard, it will be a horrible experience. Why? Because the last time I was on a snowboard, it was so frustrating and miserable and painful and embarrassing and frustrating and agonizing, every bad adjective you can think of, right? I simply won't do it, and you can't make me, right? Short of extraordinary means, right? Of course, now what's interesting is my kids, they didn't get that, right? And they would say, Dad, come on, you should go with us. And, once you kind of do it a little bit and get the hang of it, it's fun. Like, we know that you could do it if you would just try. And my attitude was, absolutely not. You go to the snow with your mother. I will fly somewhere and teach a seminar to pay for your stupid trip. That's what I'll do, right? That was my attitude. But how many times have we been on the opposite side of that? In fact, probably the most useless thing you could ever say to a child is, I know that you could do this if you would just try. There's nothing more useless you could articulate, because if that child has determined they can't do it, they aren't going to want to, and they're going to fight it all the way. Now, children are generally much more resilient than adults in this. One bad snowboard trip, and I'm done for life. Kids can fail again and again and again and keep trying, and there's a wide range in ability to fail and want to try again. Some kids are done after a few tries. Other kids will be dozens of tries. But everyone has a threshold above which they will say, no, I won't do it. And here's the really sad but true part of this. Children will prefer punishment to failure. They would rather say, no, I refuse to do that and fail again and suffer all the consequences that you will give me for refusing to do it, than to do it and fail again. Because failure is worse than punishment for most of us, right? Now, of course, they have a higher threshold, but you don't want to get to that point where they're so convinced, I can't do this, that they would prefer punishment over failure and refuse. So what do you have to do? You have to undo the whole thing and go back to what can you do? So the way to use this formula is if you were to spend 60 to 80% of your time letting children do what they can do and get better at it, whether it's music or math or writing or sport or whatever, let them do what they can do and keep getting a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better in that zone. 60 to 80% of your time. 20 to 40% of your time, you want to give them opportunity to do that which they think they could do and give them enough help to be successful. And 0% of your time asking them to do something which they cannot do. And you would have a 100% perfectly motivated human being. Now, that is extremely hard to do, but it not only works in education, it works in other areas of parenting and teaching, and it also works in business, right? If people are doing what they can do and getting better, they're happy. If you challenge them and they succeed to operate at a higher level, they're happy. But once they hit a level of having to do something they're not successful, then they start to dislike that, right? So you want to keep those in mind. So those are the 3 laws of motivation. Did you get it all? Children like to do what they can do. They want to do what they think they can do. And they hate and will refuse to do that which they believe they cannot do. And it's what they believe that makes the difference there, not what we think, right? Okay, now we'll finish up with the 2 secret weapons. These are actually 2 sides of one coin. And I learned this very, very early in the game. In fact, when I first started to teach people in my mid-20s, early 20s, mid-20s, I started to realize this fact. And that is, if your students know that you love them, everything is better. If they know that you appreciate them, that you are grateful to be with them, that you are enjoying being with them, then all the teaching and learning and everything is better. But when you are a 26-year-old violin teacher and you have a 13-year-old girl come in for a violin lesson, you do not say, hey, sweetheart, I'm so glad you're here because I love you so much. No. You have to find other ways to communicate that. So the 2 secret weapons are about communicating love. And like I said, they're 2 sides of that one coin. The first secret weapon is the power of a smile. I discovered this early on, that if you smile at someone and you just keep smiling at them, eventually they will smile back. And if they don't, they will smile, laughing at themselves, realizing how hard they're trying not to smile back, right? A smile is very contagious, but what does it communicate? I'm happy to be here with you. It is good for us to be together. I'm grateful for your presence. It communicates, I love you. So in my early days, I used to actually practice smiling techniques. I know this sounds silly, but I would check my smiling technique in a mirror. So I would try different smiles. And then I would go and practice and experiment with different smiles on different people. I don't do this anymore, but I do feel like I developed a fairly large repertoire of smiling technique, and it has served me very well. The second thing that I realized is, well, when you're teaching somebody and asking them to interact with you, and there's going to be any degree of correction required, then you need to remember that being corrected takes a bit of a toll emotionally, right? Nobody really enjoys the experience of being corrected. We all need it. We know that we need it, but it takes a little bit out of us. So this is an idea you've probably heard of before, which is the emotional gas tank or the emotional bank account. I like the bank account better than the gas tank because the gas tank idea implies that you fill it up so that you can drain it out. Whereas my teacher, Dr. Suzuki, talked about the emotional bank account and the idea of investing enough that you can live on the principal, right? And I was in Japan in the Carter years, and so the interest rates were very high. You could live on interest, depending in those days. And so I came back from Japan with this idea that when I would interact with a student, I would do what my teacher, Dr. Suzuki, did, which was build up the emotional bank account high enough that when you needed to make a correction, you could withdraw a little bit and still have your basic principal. So I thought 10%, that's what interest was, right? First house I bought, interest rate was 12%, right? So anyway, 10%. So I thought, okay, 10-to-1 ratio, right? So I realized that what you would do is you would just find positive things. Suzuki was infinitely good at this. He could always find something positive about anyone, anywhere, anytime. So I have a girl walks in, she's 13 years old, she's hormone zapped out, she's exhausted, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday, she's been in a school kind of environment all day, every day for a long time. By all rights, she should be, out playing in the fields or taking a nap or reading a book, but no, she's got to be here because this is when it can happen. And I'm about to ask her to do the hardest thing there is to do, which is concentrate fully on playing a musical instrument for 45 minutes. So she's coming in. The first thing I want to do is say something positive. Okay, I'm not talking false praise here. I'm just saying find positive. Hey, you're on time. Thanks so much for being on time. I really appreciate it when students are on time. It makes my life easier. And I know how hard it is for my kids to get their mom anywhere on time. Hey, that's a cute outfit you've got on. Okay, first of all, I don't know if it's cute. I don't know if outfit is the right word. I really don't even know what color the clothes are. But I do know one thing. A 13-year-old girl spent half an hour trying to figure out what to wear, or stayed up worrying about what to wear the night before. All I'm doing is affirming her decision. Hey, your violin's clean. That's great to have a clean violin. You must have polished it up a little bit. That's good. I don't know if she polished it up. She might not have touched it for the whole week, but it is clean. So I'm not saying false praise. I'm just saying you find positives. And for easily the first year of my teaching, I would count on my fingers and I would say 10 positive things before I would make the first correction. One of the problems about teaching violin is as soon as someone picks up a violin, they are doing everything wrong. It's continuous correction, basically. So, there's a challenge to that. And I have discovered then this incredible power of expressing your love and appreciation and your encouragement for students through these two avenues. I had one experience, I'll finish up here. This possibly changed my life more than any other single thing that happened to me as a parent with one of my children. I was living in Moscow, Idaho, and I was in Spokane. My wife was dropping me off at the airport. I was going to fly to Boise and be gone for a week, a whole week. And at that time, my fourth daughter, so she would be right in the middle of the 7, she was about 8, kind of a youngish 8, and she was the daddy's girl of all daddy's girls. She and I were just like that, and she just lost it at the airport. She's like, Daddy, do you really have to go away again? Because I miss you so much when you're gone, and my father's heart is ripped out, and I said, I do. I have a commitment. This is how I support our family. But then I thought, Spokane, Boise, this is a cheap ticket. So I made a quick phone call, and I said to her, do you want to come with me? Really? Yeah, we'll just buy a ticket right here. You can get on the plane and fly to Boise with me for the week. Really? Mom's kind of like, I said, no. We'll go to Walmart and buy some underwear and a toothbrush. I'm not totally incompetent here. So anyway, we did. I took her, and she got to sit in a writing class. She was possibly the youngest or one of the youngest kids in this class. And so she sat in this writing class 2 hours, and it was 4 days of writing class in a row. So first day, 2 hours. I honestly have no idea what she did. She might have copied half the keyword outline. That's all she got done, the whole thing. I don't know. I was very busy helping other people's children because that's what I was getting paid to do. And so the class is over. Everybody leaves. She goes with this family that I had arranged for her to hang out with. And then I taught 2 more classes. I drove and picked her up. We're driving back to the hotel. And I said, so, how'd you like the writing class? And she said, just like this, oh, Daddy, it was just wonderful. And I thought, I'm good. And then she said the thing that changed my life. She said, Daddy, how come you're not like that at home? And I realized how easy it is for me to be unconditionally enthusiastic, unconditionally supportive, unconditionally excited and appreciative of other people's children's efforts, and how easy it is to forget to be that way with my own kids. Because you're home, yes, you love me and I love you. We know this. So would you get to work because we got stuff to do? And you let that frustration and irritation contaminate the experience. And so from that day forward, I know that I made a very conscious effort to be the encouraging, enthusiastic, non-judgmental person, teacher, the best teacher I knew I could be with my own kids. And I think that we all need a good dose of that from time to time, because it is very easy to take them for granted, and we don't want to do it. So there we have it, the 4 forms of relevancy: intrinsic, inspired, contrived, and forced. Try to avoid the last. The 3 laws, and then the 2 secret weapons. So hopefully that gives you some ideas of how you can more effectively motivate your children in their learning and growing activities through the rest of your time together, which goes by very quickly, does it not? Well, God bless you. Thank you so much.